Well, actually, I mean, thank you so much for the content. I think it's really very comprehensive, and I would say provokes our thinking about how HR should be shifting. And I think you know, this whole thing about HR transformation. I've been in HR for the last 27 years, and we've been talking about it like since the last 20 years or so. But the unprecedented period now that we're going through with COVID, I mean, it just accelerates every single notion that we have about HR transformation, and makes us think about, you know, how different it is really between what we say and what we actually have to do. So I think that's an interesting bit for this period. What I like to really zoom into the number two. I think that's quite interesting, because today, as we talked about, you know, higher agility, higher discipline, but at the same time we're actually, I wouldn't say restrained, but we're also defined by a high discipline governance framework, which many companies, if you're not ready, it may be seen as a barrier and challenges rather than, you know, moving us towards the progressive point that we want to.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Anything else, Nadia?
I think the other one that's interesting is number 4. Digital is key for HR to deliver on both employee experience and compliance. And I think if I take my experience, I've been, if you look at through my profile, I've done the zigzag, and I've been through MNCs, local companies, and I guess, you know, I'm crazy enough to go through all kinds of industries, you know, from manufacturing to FMCGs to you know, IT to big data to aviation and now property development. So I don't know. Some people say, oh my God, you know, why do you do that? But I really think that's fantastic, because it sort of like how do I say? It gives me a whole integrated understanding of how HR and industry works, and I feel blessed, to be honest. But I do believe, I'm one that believe in, you know, once you do everything else, technology and blah blah blah, but I think the key to it is how do you humanize this whole experience to the employee experience, you know, because I think today many tend to forget with the SOPs, guidelines, and, you know, HRIS system. And incidentally, we're now in the midst of migrating to a new HRIS system. I keep telling my team, okay, great, we have a HRIS system, fantastic, but what's most important is it has to be a wow factor for an employee, because it means that, okay, we've got a new HR system, but how does it impact how I feel about assessing the data that I have as an employee? How do I feel about, as a leader, having the access to make, to have clarity in decisions using the data that I have without having to feel like, oh my God, I have got to go through 10 steps and so on. So I think that's key, employee experience, and of course compliance. And we talked about governance just now, and compliance naturally comes with it.
Perfect. So I will do that. So if I can ask you, which is the new HRIS system you are implementing?
Okay, so this is an interesting question, because then I get this question all the time. So obviously in all companies, when you want to go into this, you have to go through the whole tender system and you know, look through 3-4 systems. So we look through SAP. We also look at what's the other one, which is very famous, oh my God, the American version, Workday, isn't it? Workday, right? But we finally end up with a local system called Talent Oz, because, you know, we look at the scale, we're only 2,300 people versus, you know, 40,000, 50,000. So looking at the scale and the stuff that we want, plus the whole formatting, we decided that we'll go with Talent Oz, which is something that is more befitting to what we want. And as we moved on, because we have like, you know, 3 or 4 phases, and that comes on really well. We kind don't like SAP, but just that it's probably not suitable for a 2003, 2,300
Yeah.
employee set. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. So, Nadia, what I will do, I will do 2, 4, and I will then try if we have time to touch on 5, which will answer some of the role question
Mm-hmm.
you had in HR,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe close with 8, and that will actually help you connect on how do you, where to start making changes. So, now getting into the point around 2, and then we did discuss this briefly with you. This to us is really the full stack of HR operating model. And that's where I think people do some pieces and leave the other pieces. And you were kind of referring to once you start touching one, the other pieces need to be tweaked. So, for example, how can you deliver customer experience without really looking at some of the anchors around harmonization, standardization? How do you drive compliance? No, because fundamentally, customer experience and compliance are contradictory in many ways. So you need a correct digital strategy to balance the two. So unless and until you make compliance, which is industrial and is hidden and sitting behind the platform, you cannot fully deliver on customer experience, because customer experience can never be without boundaries. But that boundary should not be appearing in the day-to-day uses and adoption of the platform. So that's where our take when we work with clients and all, even on this research, is to look at all these pieces as interconnected pieces. Uh, Coming back to the focus on what are the focus within HR itself, if you look at Nadia, the focus remains very true. So think of upskill HR capabilities remains a focus, and this has been focused for I will say not only our last 3 cycles. For 20 years, I've been doing HR transformation since your days.
So this is
And
based on, is this based on the
data,
research
yeah, this is
survey
all
data
research.
that you have? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
this is
this is
all.
across global
Yeah,
companies
yeah,
and
this is
yeah.
across 12, 1,300 companies in Asia Pacific, and this has been consistent, Nadia. Across 3 cycles of the study, this has been true. And in your experience, you will go back and you will feel the same. Business
I'm
leader.
happy to see this because number 1 till at least number 5 is basically what I have here on the paperwork, because what we have as the core thing. So okay, I'm
Yeah.
on the right track.
Yeah, and to your point, if you really look at it, uh, uh, and this is not a surprise. The question is why these gaps have not been filled earlier. So, in the sense is, if this has been consistent gap, why they have not been addressed, and that goes back to your point that HR transformation itself is not a simple journey. It's many things together. And in our experience even research data is saying that is that people tend to focus more on the mechanics because that's easily addressed, to your point. So think of operations, think of technology and so on, but success of those will mean addressing softer aspects. So for example, HR capability is training, but HR capability is also fundamentally collaboration within HR. So how does COEs and operations feed in data and insights to an HRBP so that when the HRBP is meeting business leader, actually the whole power of HR comes true. If that's not happening, HRBP skill gaps will always get amplified. So if you look at the research data consistently in organizations where you will see gaps in COE and in HR ops, 20-30%, HRBP will tend to amplify that further. And then it's a combination of these things. So that's really the insight here. Uh, if you look at mature archetype of organizations, you start seeing a shift. So a couple of things are happening. One piece which is happening is while some of the words are similar, the intent is different. So mature organizations tend to pick up things which are now next level earlier. It's not that they are not doing upskill HR capability. It's a lower risk in their mind. Still 50% of them are saying it's important, but it's lower risk because collaboration in HR is happening. Similarly, if you look at integrate talent management processes, it's interesting. It appears higher in mature organization than in the overall data set. when we kind of question and probed it further, what we realized is, as you kind of push more on the experience journey, you will actually get into questioning more around level of integration. Because fundamentally what we do, we run separate programs in separate COEs. As we implement in the system, we actually look at points of integration. And if we are using one platform, it also talks through those points of integration. But reality is, as you think from a business and outcome lens, and as you think from employees lens as a consumer, do you need to think of that as two programs, or it's one program connected to events? Then the integration looks very different. So that's really the point here. Now, and that connects to the next one that Nadia is, if you ask 2017, I think we saw that compliance will go away in the research data. Then we have been consistently seeing compliance gain back. And in all our experiences, if you look at the social media challenges related to that, risk of amplification of compliance failure, suddenly compliance has a risk associated with the brand itself. So it's natural compliance will go up. And it's not surprising that employee experience and compliance are the top two. So as HR leader, how do you create a balance between these two is the biggest challenge you will have. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I will
Yes,
come to that. Yeah.
It's interesting to see how operational excellence now used to be so much talked about, and I do agree with these results, because I think when we focus too much on operational excellence, we tend to be more transactional rather than getting ourselves ready for the next step, and that's always I would say a one step back if HR is doing that, because HR is supposed to be looking ahead for the organization.
Yeah. And Nadia, to your point, you need to think of outcomes. So if employee experience is happening, if adoption is very high, which means you are not doing manual updates of data and you are not making mistakes and doing rework, naturally your operation excellence will kind of shrink. So as that maturity happens, you will see focus on outcomes, and operation excellence is an internal input. So that thing is coming through. If you look at mature archetypes, efficiencies and cost have gone up as the number one. This is again counterintuitive. Why this is happening is, as they start getting some control around experience, these are the organizations who are moving fastest with things like robotics and some of those adoption. And then that's where they are then kind of creating room for those investments, because you cannot be doing a robotics investment without justifying some cost benefit and so on. So they are literally on the next journey curve. Now I'm moving on to the section 5, and this will go back to your earlier thing. How do we start addressing challenges? Is if you look at the role within HR, people have talked of 3-pillar model, Nadia, for so long. And having worked across everything, all industries, you will realize it's actually not true. There is nothing like a pure 3-pillar model, because 3-pillar just focused on business, and it ignored the role of what is a field HR or generalist. So you can call them IR, you can call them employee relations, but that 4th pillar is very much there, and that's what data is saying. And that pillar is big. It's around 20% of HR. How do you use that pillar will have a huge value or impact. So people say it's the lower order of HRBP. Actually, that's wrong, because it kind of confuses the HRBP role. A lot of people assume field HR is there till there is complete automation of HR operations. Again, that is a wrong view of how field HR needs to be looked at. So smart organizations are using field HR as a kind of pillar to create employee connect, gain much more trust and transparency there, because that's needed, both from an experience angle, and creating that transparency and trust will allow you to navigate changes, because employees are accepting of changes being kind of pushed by HR when they trust HR much more. So that's one big insight. The other big insight was too much of bandwidth or capacity is getting into partner and vendor management. So think of
Mm.
HR, how you are managing your training providers, recruitment providers, and so on, because that's fragmented and it's managed by really wide group of people in HR, especially on mid to large organizations. It actually is creating inefficiencies and giving opportunities for vendors partners. I will not get into too much detail around this, Nadia. Whenever later
Mm.
needed, we can get into
Mm.
the depth. But the biggest thing which is happening for us is this year is really the trust as a need coming up and continuously going up. So, and then it's so logical. If you think of disruptions happening, and
Mm.
you have to become a trusted advisor. Trust becomes a
Mm.
issue not only for HRBP but also for HR ops. So think of this: HRBP
Mm.
needs trust with business leaders to kind of partner with them and create impact. Similarly, an HR operations needs trust within their peer group. Otherwise, why they will listen to HR operations saying, "Look, data is telling me this is what we need to make changes around." So you need
Mm.
that trust to really drive ongoing change and so on. So that's really the point around trust. Uh, HR technology is actually seeing improvements, and these are the pieces why, while satisfaction is going up, and you have taken a, I will say, a different call from most people, because most people will look at global platforms and kind of get stuck by that. You have chosen platform which is contextual and relevant to where you are, which is actually not a bad strategy. Now looking at why people are selecting it and how they are using it really is around analytical capability,
Mm.
with the points around user experience and total cost of ownership. So those are selection criteria, Nadia. And interestingly, if you look at it, these are not a direct selection criteria. They naturally bundle other things. Analytical capabilities getting right means that the platform has domain. They are able to connect across processes and convert it into right analytics for you. User experience will mean not only the functional connects, but also platform's ability to, on the back end, do technical integrations. Only then you can deliver on user experience. Total
Mm.
cost of ownership view will mean that platform and HR operating model is working well together. So, and hence, this is for us is really interesting, and it's a good switch happening. I am quickly running through some of the slides here. Now, what I wanted to share with you is this one, is that you will realize as you get your HRIS implemented and it starts working well. And couple of things, and let me address that question. And what data says, and in real life experience, is you will need to think of getting your LOA. So think of HR
Mm.
function and the LOA you have.
Mm.
So for example, as you are hiring, what is the variation allowed on comp, and if variation in what zone happens, who approves it? And that's where very simple LOAs frustrate business and frustrate stakeholders. I'm not saying LOAs need to change. Fundamentally, you need to create greater empowerment around LOAs. So one is,
Mm.
the same LOAs can be delivered very differently if they are automated on the system, and you are getting appropriate alerts when it's being broken. So it's not to say that 5 or 20% variation on comp you cannot hire. You can still allow that hiring with the right appropriate cost center making that approval. But you get that alert. Not only you get an alert, you get a pattern. You say, is one business doing it consistently more often than others? Then it actually needs a highest level discussion to say why it's happening. Is there a need for change and so on? So that's the mindset which you need to architect the process, program, and configure that. Because what it does, as you clean that up, it will allow for faster execution of transactions. With
Mm.
mobile, you will have an opportunity of not only addressing your internal workforce. At some stage, mobile platforms are vernacular, so they can actually get onto even your contingent workforce. And once that starts working, Nadia, you have an opportunity of moving to next gen tools, because then you may have a small HR operations group with overall operations working well. Then that is the best group to drive NLP, NLG, chatbots,
Mm.
machine learning,
Mm.
and all of that. Doing
Mm.
it before that stage is reached actually will not add any value. And that's what this data is saying. Last point from me, Nadia, is around this one. And I did talk about ways of working earlier. So I am just trying kind of saying where to trigger this. And really, the first piece to start is clearly defined HR governance model. And here I will differentiate. This is not the governance from LOA perspective, but I can say this is the clearly defined HR interaction model within HR and with business. So are you or are your HR BPs sitting with business leaders every month to understand business strategy, changes which they are driving? So think of today. Today, if you sit with business leader in sales marketing versus projects, you will have very different kind of demand. Sales marketing will say, I need much more digital capability. Projects will say, I need to kind of become more leaner because not all work is happening and so on. So given that demand, what's the talent strategy? What are the areas you need to do things faster? What are the areas where you need to kind of tone down, kind of slow things and so on? And then hence how you are performing in those areas, what's data telling you. Then you go back and work with HR to drive solutions, do some changes, and with data again go back next month and do this conversation. In times of crisis, this could even look like a weekly conversation, which currently will be happening. So how do you make this institutional and an ongoing discipline in HR? Because as this gets going, it will make HR outside in, and everything else will change. And that's why it's so important.
Hi. Yep.
So that's it from my side. I will not bore you with more data.
No, it's okay. It's good. It's good. This is really good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Nadia, do you have any questions for Shashwat?
No, no question. The only comment, I'm feeling much better because all those that's being shared, where it's almost exactly what we're or what I'm thinking for. In fact, to be honest, we had our KPI setting early part of this year, and then when COVID came in, I'm actually just last year I was telling my two GMs, I said, look, I'm recalibrating my structure. I'm also changing some of the KPIs because, and it just doesn't make sense because the new norm is now asking us to work very differently. And good to know because I literally am going to focus a lot more. I mean, we've always had data analytics as the key focus, but I'm now kind of like accelerated much faster and literally thinking of even shifting the person who's doing that to be reporting directly to me, because I think that the fluidity of being agile is so paramount that we need to look at how do we move into projects rather than the traditional pillars of doing stuff and so on. Yeah. So I'm good. I feel
great.
Good.
Thanks.
Thanks, Nadia.
I think that was great. Thank you, Shashwat. I think you indeed covered every point very extensive. Those were extensive points, but you covered them very crisply and very aptly. I think you very nicely pointed out that adaptability is built on the foundation of HR operating model, digital tools, and discipline governance. And since the ways of working for HR are changing so rapidly, I think adaptability, as Nadia also said, is paramount now.